Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So I hope all of you are doing well. So we were studying about the skeletal system. We're going to continue that in today's lecture. So we've studied up till the functions of the skeletal system. So it is the basic knowledge, one of the basic things that you learn when you enter the medical school. Now we're going to see more of this skeletal system. So let's talk about the bone classification. Remember one thing, these slides that we're studying, every line of these slides could become an MCQ. Okay, so these are very important. This is the basic medical knowledge which you must know. So try to remember it by heart. So there are 206 named bones in the human body, and each one of those bones belongs to one of the two groups. The groups are the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. Axial skeleton forms the long axis of the body, this one in the bluish color. It includes the bones of the skull, the vertebral column, and the rib cage. These bones are involved in protection, support, and carrying other body parts. So this is the axis along which all of the appendages are attached. What are the appendages? Or arms and or legs. So bones of upper and lower limbs and the girdles. Girdles are the attachments of the appendicular skeleton with the axial skeleton. So the pelvic girdle that is present here, and the legs, the attachment of the legs to the axial skeleton is via pelvic girdles, and then there is a shoulder girdle that is present here. These girdles attach the arms and the legs to the axial skeleton or the trunk. This appendicular skeleton is involved in locomotion and manipulation of the environment. Now to move we require our legs. So legs take us from point A to point B. Moreover, we use our hands to manipulate the surrounding environment, that is picking up a thing or dropping a thing or doing some kind of work. So for these purposes we use both our legs and our hands. Whereas axial skeleton would protect the vital organs, that is the brain, the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, liver. All of these organs are protected, well protected by the axial skeleton. Now if we classify bones, they're classified like this. First comes the bone of the head region, that is 8 bones are present in the skull or the cranium, and 14 bones make up the face, the facial region. Then comes the hyoid bone, which is present over here near the Adam's apple, anteriorly in our neck. Then there are auditory ossicles which are present in ears, and they help us in interpreting sound and listening to the sounds, as well as they help us in balancing our body. Then comes the vertebral column or the vertebras, which are 26 in number. Then there is the thoracic cavity or thorax. Thorax consists of one sternum and 12 pair of ribs, or 24 ribs in total. So cranium 8 bones, 14 in the face, 1 hyoid, 6 auditory ossicles, 3 on both sides, small bones, then 1 sternum and 24 ribs. Now if we look at the appendicular skeleton, that includes the arms, the legs and the girdles. What would we see here? We would see there are two clavicles, one on each side, two scapulas. This larger bone is the scapula or the wing bone, one on each side. Then let's come down towards the upper limb. There is one humerus on each side, one radius ulna on each side, then 8 carpal bones, 5 metacarpal bones, and 14 phalanges on each side. So that makes up 28 phalanges, 10 metacarpals, 16 carpals, 2 radius, 2 ulna, 2 humerus. This was the composition of the upper limb. So if we move towards the lower limb, in the pelvic girdle, there is one hip bone, large bone, hip bone on each side. Then comes the femur, a single femur on each side, one tibia fibula, then one patella. Patella is here in front of the knee joint. The other arrangement is kind of same as that of the hand. There are the 7 tarsals on each side, 5 metatarsals on each side, and 14 phalanges on each side. So if we tally that, all of that would total into 206 bones in total. Now let's get into the classification of the bones. We're not going to go into more details, just need to review this thing. So there are 4 types of bones. The first type of bone is the long bone. Long bone is a bone in which longitudinal length is more than its width, horizontal width. All bones of the limbs except for the patella, that is present on the kneecap, that is a circular kind of bone, are long bones. Moreover, bones of the wrist and the ankle also constitute long bones. So if you look at the carpal bones, scaphoid, lunate, etc., these bones are longer as compared to their width. Sorry, the bones of the wrist and ankle are also short bones. Only the tibia, fibula, radius ulna, and humerus and femur, these are the long bones. The patella and the bones of the wrist and the ankle are short bones. So we needed to memorize the names of carpals in sequence. So if you start from the lateral towards the medial, how would you remember this? There was a teacher who told us a mnemonic in Urdu. The mnemonic was Sophia Loran Tinde Paka. Tinde tere kache hain. That means scaphoid, lunate, trapezoid, pisiform, trapezium, triquetral, capitate, and hamate. So these are the 8 carpal bones. The carpal bones are short bones because they are roughly cube shaped, and the bones of the wrist and the ankle are included in this category. Then comes the flat bones. Flat bones are those bones which are thin, flattened, and usually a bit curved, such as this bone, kind of flat, curved at the end towards the anterior, and it is not so thick, it is thinner, a thin bone. Scapula on the back of the shoulder girdle, sternum, the ribs, and most bones of the skull are flat bones. Then comes the irregular bones. Irregular bones have weird shapes that would fit none of the three previous types of the bones. They include the vertebrae, the hip bones, two skull bones, that is sphenoid and ethmoid. This is the sphenoid bone, which just looks like a butterfly. This is the sphenoid bone that is present immediately anterior and posterior to the nasal cavity. Sorry, anterior and superior to the nasal cavity. Now let's look at the bone structure. These things we've studied many times. So all of the bones consist of a dense, solid outer layer that is known as the compact bone. This outer layer is the compact bone, and an inner layer of spongy tissue. So this layer is solid, this layer is soft. This spongy tissue is a honeycomb of flat needle-like projections which are known as trabeculae. These are trabeculae which are present in here. Here you can see the trabeculae, honeycomb-like structure. Then there is the space for the bone marrow. If you look at the long bones consist of a shaft. This is the shaft, and then two ends on both sides. The shaft is known as the diaphysis, and it consists of a thick collar outer side of compact bone surrounding a central marrow cavity where the bone marrow is present. In adults, the marrow cavity contains fat, that is yellow bone marrow, and expanded ends, this one and this one, these are epiphyses. Thin layer of compact bone is present here. Here there is the layer is thick, whereas here the layer is thin, and anteriorly spongy bone is present. Joint surfaces of joint surface of each epiphysis is covered with hyaline cartilage. So wherever the epiphysis is making a joint with another bone, cartilage would be present on the end, as you can see here. This is made up of hyaline cartilage and it is known as articular cartilage. This we've studied in joints. So it cushions the bone and reduces friction during movement. So we've talked in length about this when we were studying the joint section. These are the cartilages. Okay, so the external surface of the entire bone except for the joint surfaces of the epiphysis is covered by a double layered membrane that is known as periosteum. This is the periosteum that would cover whole bone except at the epiphysis where the cartilage is present. Outer fibrous layer is dense irregular connective tissue, and inner cellular layer contains osteoprogenitor cells and osteoblasts. Osteoprogenitor cells are those cells which are going to transform into mature bone cells. Osteoblasts are immature uh, cells of the bone, which would then transform into osteocyte, and when there are some cells which are known as osteoclasts which would break down these osteocytes. Periosteum is richly supplied with nerve fibers, lymphatic vessels and blood vessels. They enter the bone of the shaft via a nutrient foramen. So this is the nutrient foramen through which they would enter the shaft. So if we look at the microscopic picture, this is the periosteum, the outermost layer, then the fibrous layer, then the osteogenic layer, and then the woven bone in the center. So internal bone surfaces are covered with a delicate connective tissue membrane which is known as endosteum. This is endosteum. Periosteum is to the outside, towards the outside, whereas internal structure is covered with endosteum. It covers the trabeculae of spongy bone in the marrow cavities and lines the canals that pass through compact bone. It contains both osteoblasts as well as osteoclasts. So the major growth of the bone would take place here. If you look at the short, irregular and flat bones, they are composed of thin plates of periosteum covered compact bone on the outside and endosteum covered spongy bone on the inside. So this is the inner This is the compact bone, this is the compact bone, and in between this, the spongy bone is present. And outermost layer would be periosteum, and this would be covered by endosteum. They have no diaphysis or epiphysis because they are not cylindrical in shape. They contain bone marrow between their trabeculae in here, whereas in long bones it was in the center. In flat bones, the internal spongy bone layer is known as the diploid, and the whole arrangement resembles a stiffened sandwich, as you can see. Now let's look at the formation of the bony skeleton. What happens is before 8 week of gestation, the human embryonic skeleton is made up of fibrous membranes and hyaline cartilage. After 8th week, bone tissue begins to replace the fibrous membrane and the hyaline cartilage, and the development of bone from a fibrous membrane is known as intramembranous ossification, whereas the replacement of hyaline cartilage with bone is known as endochondral ossification. But my previous lecture is uploaded on YouTube. You can watch it. You can take the slide from your fellows, and we've talked about this thing in particular in detail over there. So I'm not going to delve into more detail of this. Now there is two type of maturation of bony tissue. One is intramembranous ossification and the other is endochondral ossification. I've explained it in detail over there. So this is a embryo, and as you can see, endochondral bone is forming. The long bones, they would mature via endochondral ossification, whereas the flat bones would mature via intramembranous ossification. So this is just a review, as I said. So we're going to review this. So intramembranous ossification takes place in some bones of the skull, the frontal, the parietal, the temporal, and the occipital bone. The facial bones, the clavicles, the pelvis, the scapula, and the parts of mandible are formed by intramembranous ossification. So all the flat, irregular kind of bones, they ossify via this method. Ossification is maturation of bone tissue, formation of the bone. Prior to ossification, these structures exist as fibrous membranes made up of embryonic connective tissue that is known as mesenchyme. Now, this point is very important with an examination point of view. So you could be asked that bones are derived from dash dash. The answer would be mesenchyme. Mesenchyme is the you can say progenitor structure or the fetal structure from which bones, cartilage, etc. are derived. So remember mesenchyme. This is very important point. Then comes the endochondral ossification. It begins with the formation of a hyaline cartilage model which will later be replaced with the bone. So what happens is the outer cartilage model is replaced by a bone in this kind of in this type of ossification. This is present in the long bones only. So most bones in the body develop by this model. Limb bone development is taken as an example. So first the bones would be composed of cartilage. Then before birth, usually during the 8th week of intrauterine life, in the center of the bone near the diaphysis, one spot would start transforming into bone. That would be known as the primary center of the ossification. Then after birth, there are multiple spots which would transform the cartilaginous tissue into the bony tissue. They appear after birth and they would form the epiphyses. Fusion of epiphyses with the diaphysis starts at puberty and is completed by the 25 years of age, after which no more bone growth can occur. So epiphyses are developed separately, diaphysis is developed separately, and there is a space in between those which are known as epiphyseal growth plates, which are composed of cartilage in children. So up until the age of 25, the bones continue to grow slowly from that epiphyseal growth plate. And at 25 years of age, that epiphyseal growth plate would close down, and there would be no more of elongation of bone, development of bone in terms of longitudinal growth. So this is what happens in the long bones. So if we look at a young bone, a typical young bone will ossify in three parts: the two ends from the secondary centers and the intervening shaft from primary center. Before ossification is completed, the following parts of the bone can be defined. So epiphysis, diaphysis, metaphysis, and epiphyseal plate of the cartilage. Okay, so this is the proximal epiphysis, the distal epiphysis, the diaphysis, and in between those is the metaphysis, where in children the growth plate is present, epiphyseal growth plate. Okay, just a second. All of these things we've studied already. Okay, so epiphysis is the outer end and tips of a bone which would ossify from the secondary center. These are of the following types. There is pressure epiphysis. Pressure epiphysis is articular, made up of cartilage, and takes part of is covered by the cartilage, and it would take part in transmission of the weight. Examples are head of the femur, lower end of the radius. So whichever part, whichever epiphysis is dealing with the pressure or the weight of the body, that would be known as pressure epiphysis. Then there is traction epiphysis, that is non-articular, that does not form joint and does not take part in the transmission of the weight. It always provides attachments to one or more tendons which exert a traction on the epiphysis. The traction epiphysis ossify later than the pressure epiphysis, and the examples are trochanters of femur and the tubercles of the humerus. These epiphyses, these ones. Here the trochanters are present out here. This is the pressure epiphysis, and here the trochanters on either side, on this point, they've been known as traction epiphysis. They would provide traction to the bone. Traction is just like stretching. Atavistic epiphysis is phylogenetically an independent bone which in man becomes fused with another bone, such as the coracoid process of the scapula. So in scapula, you will see there is an L-shaped part on the top of the scapula that looks like separate bone. So in children, when children are born, there are more bones than the adult. Sometimes it's said that there are more than 300 or 6 or 8 bones in children. And later on in life, these bones would keep on fusing with each other and making a single bone. Coracoid process is one of those. Aberrant epiphysis is not always present, such as the epiphysis at the end head of the first metacarpal and the base of the other metacarpal bones. Sometimes it is present, sometimes it is not present. That is why it is known as aberrant. Aberrant means which cannot be predicted. In young individuals, the diaphysis is an elongated short of a long bone which would ossify to form the primary center. The middle part is the diaphysis, and the metaphysis is epiphyseal end of a diaphysis. And this is the zone of active growth where the growth plate would be present. So this is the metaphysis where the growth plate would be present. Growth would be taking place from here. It would be present between the epiphysis and the diaphysis. In adults, this cannot be appreciated. Metaphysis cannot be appreciated in adults. Before epiphyseal fusion, the metaphysis is richly supplied with blood through the arteries, forming hairpin bends. This is a common site of osteomyelitis in children because the bacteria and emboli are easily trapped in the hairpin bends, causing infarctions. So the capillaries in these parts are very minute and they turn just like a hairpin turn, 180-degree turn. And The bacteria and the emboli are actually thrombi which are traveling through the blood, clots of blood which are traveling through the blood. They can deposit there and they can cause problems with the blood supply and infection of the joint or the bone, that is known as osteomyelitis. Epiphyseal plate of cartilage. This is the epiphyseal plate of cartilage in small children up to 18, 20, 25 years of 23 years of age. The bones look like this. If some illiterate person sees the bone, he would say the bone looks broken from here. This is not broken. There is a growth plate that is present here. This plate would separate epiphysis from the diaphysis. Epiphysis from the metaphysis. This is the metaphysis, this is the epiphysis. Proliferations of cells in this cartilaginous plate is responsible for the lengthwise growth of a long bone after the epiphyseal fusion. The bone can no longer grow in length. So at first this is present, which is producing cells and adding the cells to the metaphysis. So the metaphysis keeps on growing in length and the bone keeps on growing. The child keeps on growing in length. Then these cartilaginous cells would disappear and there would be no more bone growth. The growth cartilage is nourished by both the epiphyseal as well as metaphyseal arteries. Both this and this are arteries of these and arteries of these are present and supplying blood to this growth plate. So there are 4 types of bone cells that are present in bones. The osteoprogenitor cells, which are the stem cells derived from mesenchyme, which produce other stem cells, and osteoblasts. Now remember, osteoblasts are you can say immature bone cells which would produce new bone, and once osteoblasts become entrapped in the matrix, mature, they produce and secrete uh, osteoblasts are actually secreting matrix, and when they become entrapped in that, they would be known as osteocytes, which are mature bone cells. Osteoclasts are not derived from osteoprogenitor cells. They are related to macrophages, monocytes. They are formed by multiple cells and are multinucleated and are involved in the bone resorption or breakdown of the bones. So what happens is osteoprogenitor cells or the stem cells, which would are derived from the mesenchyme, they develop into the osteoblasts. Osteoblasts would secrete the matrix and then become entrapped in that matrix and known as osteocyte. And osteoclasts break down these osteocytes. Now, composition of bony matrix and the microscopic structure we'll study in the next lecture, along with the new system that will start. Okay, we'll say take care. Allah Hafiz.